Over 2,000 young women were trained as snipers for the Soviet Union in World War II, but fewer than 500 lived to see the war end. They were supposed to be deadly and precise, yet 80% never made it home. This was not because they lacked skill, but because the war itself turned against them in ways they could not control. So what went wrong for these fighters? Let's peer back into one of history's darkest periods to see why only 80% of female snipers died in World War II. Women in war. To understand why so many World War II female snipers died, you first have to understand who these women were and the world they came from. They were not like soldiers from other countries. You see, in Great Britain, for example, women did serve in uniform. They were operating anti-aircraft guns to shoot down German planes starting in 1941. But there was a strict rule. Only the men were allowed to pull the trigger. But the Soviet Union, they saw things very differently. These young women, usually between the ages of 18 and 25, were children of Joseph Stalin's regime. They had grown up in a system that the motherland, or Rodina as they called it, was everything. They were staunch Soviet loyalists. When Germany invaded, they didn't just feel fear, they felt a burning duty to fight. So when the call went out for volunteers, thousands of women stepped forward. More than 2,000 of them were trained as snipers. Their mission was not to charge into machine gun fire and massive frontal assaults like the men did. They were given a different, perhaps even more terrifying task. They were taught to harass the enemy, to strike from a distance, to put fear into the hearts of the German invaders by picking them off one by one. But the reality of their lives on the front lines was far from glorious. The Soviet army made almost no accommodations for them. Their hair was cut short, not just for practicality, but to erase anything that made them look soft. As the war dragged on, the conditions became a killer in itself. By the fourth year, the Germans were being pushed back, and the Soviets were constantly on the move. The women snipers marched for days and weeks on end through thick mud and pouring rain. They were exhausted, hungry, and always damp. The horses pulling their supplies could barely move through the muck. The women became so tired that they would sometimes fall asleep while walking. Their bodies were moving, but their minds would just switch off. To keep from collapsing, they would link arms with the woman next to them. If one fell asleep, the others would hold her up and drag her along until she woke up. And as they pushed deeper into enemy territory, their role began to change. They were no longer just hidden hunters in the distance. They were being pulled into the direct, brutal infantry fighting right alongside their male comrades. This shift, born of necessity and exhaustion, is the key to understanding why so many of them never made it home. Marching in men's boots. The training these women received sounded good. Well, on paper, they learned how to camouflage themselves, how to judge wind speed, and how to squeeze a trigger without flinching. But there is a dark secret about their preparation that explains a lot about why so many died before the war ended. First off, the training was often rushed. Why? The Soviet Union was losing soldiers at an unbelievable rate. Millions of men had already been killed or captured, so when the women volunteered, the army couldn't afford to train them for a reasonable period of time like proper snipers needed. The training that many of them got is what you might call on-the-job training. They learned the basics in a hurry, maybe fired a few dozen rounds at targets, and then were sent straight to the front lines. Many early volunteers like Lyudmila Pavlichenko used rifles taken from the dead, surviving by grit and stubborn luck. Once they arrived at the front, the problems with their equipment became painfully clear. The army gave them standard men's uniforms. We know that woman's body is shaped differently than a man's. The shoulders are different, the hips are different. These young women had to march for miles, crawl through mud, and lie still for hours in uniforms that bunched up in the wrong places and restricted their movement. The boots were even worse. Men's boots on women's feet caused blisters, sores, and foot problems that would only get worse with all the walking they had to do. They had to alter their own uniforms by hand, using whatever they could find just to make them fit well enough to move and fight. But the problem of equipment went far beyond uncomfortable clothing. Take the story of a sniper named Nina Petrova. She was tough, skilled, and had survived years of war. She had killed many enemies and done her duty for the motherland. But on May 1st, 1945, just days before the war in Europe finally ended, Nina was killed. What happened? She was hit by a mortar attack, and the blast pushed her off a cliff. Now, here's the detail that matters. She was not wearing a helmet at the time. Why wasn't she wearing a helmet? Maybe it was uncomfortable. Or maybe it was a man's helmet that didn't fit her head properly and kept sliding down over her eyes. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is that protective gear for these women was often an afterthought. They were given rifles and told to kill, but the equipment needed to keep them alive was either poor quality, badly sized, or simply not available. Then there were the personal needs that nobody in the army seemed to think about. These women bled every month, but there were no sanitary pads, no tampons, nothing. They had to tear up old cloth, use rags, or find whatever they could to manage their periods while hiding in a ditch or lying in the freezing mud waiting for a German soldier to walk into their sights. We can only imagine the discomfort, the risk of infection. Imagine trying to stay perfectly still and focused when your body is going through something that the army completely ignored. This lack of basic care and proper equipment wore them down physically and mentally. They knew the army saw them as soldiers first and women second, or maybe not at all. They accepted that. But when you are tired, hungry, wearing boots that give you blisters, and trying to use a rifle scope that fogs up every 5 minutes, your chances of surviving go down. Your reaction time slows. Your judgment gets cloudy. And in the world of snipers, where one mistake means a bullet in your own head, those small disadvantages add up to a body count. The men they fought alongside had the same shortages, yes, but the men were not wearing uniforms that fit poorly because they were made for a different gender. The men did not have to deal with the monthly reality of being a woman in a war that pretended those realities did not exist. The system had trained them to kill, but it had failed to equip them to live. And as the war pushed them harder and deeper into the fighting, these small failures became deadly. The final price. Now we come to the hardest part of this story, the actual job of a sniper. It sounds almost romantic in movies. A hidden hero, one shot, one kill, silent and safe. But the real life of a frontline sniper was pure misery. And for women, it was misery piled on top of more misery. Imagine you have to lie down in the mud, not for an hour, not for a morning, but for an entire day, maybe 2 days. You cannot move, you cannot scratch an itch, you cannot sneeze, you cannot eat a proper meal or go to the bathroom. You just lie there in the freezing cold or the burning sun, waiting for a German soldier to show his face. The insects crawl all over you. The rain soaks through your poorly fitting uniform. Your body goes numb, but you stay still. Because if you move, even a little, a German sniper who is also lying somewhere out there, also waiting, will put a bullet in your skull. This was their life. And they did it over and over again. Many of them were wounded, sometimes badly. They would go to a hospital, patch themselves up, and then go right back to the front to do it all over again. Their dedication to the motherland was absolute. But the danger was always there, waiting. Remember the famous sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko? She was one of the deadliest snipers in history, with over 300 confirmed kills. But even she had moments where death breathed right in her face. One time, she was out in the field hunting Germans. She had just settled into a hiding spot when bullets came flying past her head, missing by inches. She realized she was trapped. There were at least 2 enemy snipers aiming at her, and they knew exactly where she was. She had to do something drastic, so she let go. She dropped 12 feet straight down, landing hard on the ground between 2 graves in a cemetery. The pain shot up her spine, but she could not cry out. She could not move. She lay there, pretending to be dead, knowing that if she flinched, the snipers would put another bullet in her just to make sure. The sun beat down on her for hours. Insects crawled all over her face, biting her, stinging her. She did not move a muscle. Finally, after the sun went down and darkness covered her, she crawled back to her own lines. She spent 2 days in bed and over a week walking with a crutch. She was one of the few lucky ones. Many others did not. Take Rosa Shanina. She was a young woman, only in her early 20s, and she had already proven herself as a sniper. She was brave and skilled, but bravery does not stop a mortar shell. On January 28, 1945, during a big attack in East Prussia, Rosa was caught in mortar fire. She was trying to protect a wounded commander when the shells came down. She was killed instantly, just like that. Months of surviving, and then one moment, one explosion, and she was gone. But there was another danger that these women faced. A danger even worse than bullets or bombs. And that was the danger of being captured. War has rules. The Geneva Convention says that if you capture a soldier, you have to treat them decently. You give them food, shelter, and medical care. You do not hurt them. But on the Eastern Front, those rules often meant nothing, especially for female snipers. The Germans saw these women as something unnatural. Women were not supposed to fight. Women were not supposed to kill German soldiers. So when they captured a female sniper, they did not treat her like a prisoner of war. They treated her like a criminal, like something to be punished. Many were tortured terribly before they were killed. The Axis forces simply ignored the Geneva Convention. This changed everything for the women holding the rifles. A male soldier who was captured might hope to spend the rest of the war in a prison camp, uncomfortable but alive. A female sniper knew that capture meant a slow, painful death. So you see, as the war dragged on, these female snipers were pushed into direct frontline combat despite rushed training and poor equipment, while exhaustion made them easy targets. For those captured by the Germans, the brutal fate of being shot on sight meant there was no coming home for 80% of them.